Okay, welcome back this afternoon, folks. This afternoon, we're going to just get an update on services and supports for people who are deafblind as it relates to the bill we have on our wall with regard to those services. And we are joined by Angela Smith-Jang and Fred Jones. It's nice to see you both here. Welcome to House Human Services, and we have Rebecca Sippernagel here as well in person. I'm just trying to think, Fred, this is probably your first time in this for this committee this year. So we'll just take a brief walk around the room and we'll say who we are and where we're from so that you know who's in the room, okay?
Thank you. Thank you.
My name is Teresa Wood. I'm from Waterbury, and I also serve Bolton, Buellscore, and Huntington.
Hi, I'm Ray Garofano. I live in Essex and I also represent Essex Junction.
Hey, I'm Jubilee McGill from Bridgeport and represent Middlebury, New Haven, and Weybridge as well.
And I'm Esme Cole representing Hartford.
Hi, my name is Zahn Eastis. I live in Guilford and also represent Vernon.
Good afternoon, I'm Todd Nielsen, I represent Brandon Forestdale.
Hello, Doug Bishop. I represent Colchester's Chittenden 20 district.
Brenda Steady, East Milton, Westford.
Hi, good afternoon. Eric McGuire, Rutland City.
Good afternoon. Dan Noyes. I represent Wolcott, Hyde Park, Johnson, and Belvedere.
And Donahue from Northfield, also representing Berlin.
Great, and we have
Hi, Fred.
I know your colleague Rebecca and
Over here in the corner, Lori Morrison.
great. So thank you both for being here this afternoon. As you know, we have a bill on the wall that speaks to the services for people who are deafblind, and we know that there's been I guess you might call it a pilot or something like that going on, and we're interested in understanding more about what Dale does for people who are deafblind and what your thoughts are about the ability to provide supports for people in the future. As what I'm being told, at least, that these services are winding down. So I'm not sure who is up first to speak, but the floor is yours for either one of you.
Angela, I'm ready to jump in if that's okay with you.
That's great, Fred. Thank you. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. I appreciate this chance to talk with you. I'll start by saying this is a statewide program, so it was really nice to hear all the representation from around the state. And Representative Wood, I was thinking I'd do like a 5 to 7 minute intro. Is that appropriate? Or
that sounds perfect, Fred. Thank you so much.
Okay. So I wanted to say two things. One, how's the support service program or SSP used? And then the second thing is, how did we get here? And I'll just start with how it's used because I think that might give people a little background if you're not familiar with this. But it's basically, many states have it. I believe all states have some type of SSP program. And it's for people who are deaf and blind, who have a dual sensory loss. And I give you a quick example of why this is important. A person who's blind can use their white cane and they can travel around Montpelier, navigating, learning the routes and things like that, learning how to navigate the environment. And of course, a person who's deaf can do the same. They can, access many things in Montpelier, use ASL when they need it, and interact. The challenge here is when you have the dual sensory loss, when you're blind or low vision and deaf or hard of hearing, it makes traveling more difficult and getting information more difficult. So if I'm a person who's blind and also deaf, the challenge is not being able to hear what's happening with traffic and traffic patterns. So a person who's blind can navigate down State Street, and when they get to an intersection, they're listening to the lights that are beeping and the traffic patterns, which lanes are starting, which lanes are stopping. You're really relying a lot on your hearing. But without that sense, a person who's blind loses that ability to navigate independently in certain circumstances. So you think of the support service program as a way to have a partner with you or a service provider who can help a person who's deaf and blind get information. So let's just say that same person who's deaf and blind wanted to go to the farmer's market in Montpelier. The SSP, who's specially trained to know how to help somebody with dual sensory loss, would pick the person up, give them a ride. And when they get to the farmer's market, there's lots of information they can provide to the person. The person's going to want to know visually what's out there, where are we, what's happening in the environment. They're going to want to know, the visual information, the environmental information, and a person who's trained as an SSP can provide that either depending on the amount of hearing loss, but sometimes it's drawing on someone's back or their arm to give them information. It's very different than ASL interpreting, because when an ASL interpreter, which is specially certified and trained to do that, they're interpreting word for word what each person is saying. The SSP is very different. They're giving environmental information, visual information. They may say, there are 10 booths here. Some are donuts, some are pasta, some are vegetables. The people look happy. There are several dogs here. It's mountainous. It's a cloudy day. Things like that somebody might not know because of their vision loss or their hearing loss. The other types of services they can provide are helping somebody do errands, helping somebody get to an appointment, accessing social events, and things like that. So really what this is about is helping people that might be isolated because of their disability. This allows somebody to get out, interact with their community, get information they need. And it varies. I use the farmer's market as an example, but there are lots of other types of events people are accessing. And they're telling us, this is changing my life. This is, I now can access things that I never thought I'd be able to do before. So that just gives you a little snapshot. SSP can also help somebody read their mail, give them that information, which is also needed to know what your appointments are and things like that. So it's a full circle kind of service to assist people who are deaf and blind. Now, I'll just leave with the how's it used part with the navigation part. So SSPs are also specially trained to guide someone. It's a pretty simple technique. Basically, the person grabs the elbow of the guide and they stay 1/2 step behind them and they just kind of follow. And based on just that kind of connection, somebody might know where their stairs are coming up because the person will pause and then they'll start going up, or they'll pause and start going down, or they'll stop at an intersection. So the support service providers are very specially trained to provide that kind of navigation and to give the information that somebody needs. Now, just before I get into the how do we get here part, I'll just end this section by saying there's a dual benefit in this. So we're hearing also the people that provide the service, the SSPs, are often people who might be retired or looking for part-time work, and the bond that's formed with the person and the feeling that I'm doing something really important. I've heard from several SSP providers, so that's really cool. So how did we get here? This started in right mid-pandemic. We became aware of an opportunity through the Administration of Community Living that some funding was available. It was called the Public Health Workforce Funds. And basically it gave a list of like 8 things that it could be used for by the state. And it had things like, helping with the nursing industry, helping with a list of several health-related type things, but one of them was social integration. And so we kind of said that's what people who are deaf and blind really need, the SSP program. Let's do a pilot. So Dale put out an RFP. Vancro bid on it and did get the contract. That was a 2-year period, it was $120,000. And what we found was, because we really weren't sure who was out there, because a lot of people don't identify themselves as deaf and blind, that yes, it meets a need. Yes, the people are out there. And we had predicted between 25 to 35 people. And we found out that, in fact, we're serving 25 people regularly. There is a waiting list that I'll talk about at the end. But so after that pilot, the 2-year pilot for 120,000, Dale, knows this is important, and we explored other funding options. And for the year that we're in right now, the federal fiscal year 25 that ends in 9/30, we were able to get $50,000 from the State Independent Living Council as one-time funding, and $80,000 from FMAP money, with an extension of an extra $35,000 through December of FMAP money. So currently there's a waiting list for the program. To run the program fully, Vancro said $165,000 a year would fund it fully, which means, they can provide the monthly service to 25 people for 25 hours a month, and also do the training of the SSPs and the core expenses for the organization. The waiting list part, in order to keep it at 25 and give people enough hours to get out into the community, they have a waiting list. If they let more people in, then they have to reduce the hours. So, but the range is between 25 and 35 people, we believe, statewide. And I think I'll just wrap up by saying I get invoices each month, and I can see who's been served, how many hours they got, the types of support that they received. And I know Vancro and some other folks are coming on Friday. They have all the stories that I'm sure they'll share with you. But I'm going to pause there, because I think I've covered the 2 things I had planned on. I'm open for questions.
Thank you. I didn't know if Angela if you had anything you wanted to say before we open it up for questions.
I think Fred covered everything really well. I would just say, we're really grateful that we had the federal funding to be able to pilot this service. And it's clear that it's really meeting an important need in the state, especially helping these folks address social isolation, which we know has significant health impact on people. So we're happy that it's been successful. We in terms of building it into the Dale budget as a permanently, we weren't able to do that for state fiscal year 26, given the federal requirements for prioritizing other things like conflict of interest and the statutory requirements of things. So there just wasn't the ability to prioritize it among so many other things. But we do really think that it's making a difference for the people that it's serving.
Thank you. You answered one of my questions, which would be why the department didn't prioritize funding for this for FY26. Although it's a relatively small amount of money and a relatively small number of people, it obviously makes from what I've heard from my constituent, makes a huge difference in quality of life and access to the community and social isolation, all those things that you said, Fred. Question here from Representative Garofano.
Thank you. Kind of following up on the conversation about funding, how does Dale kind of follow or track projects like this that were introduced as a pilot and now the funding will end, it will stop? Like, do you have any mechanisms to kind of track these for future funding consideration for future fiscal year? Like, would you bring this back in 27? Would it be in the mix of consideration for funding?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think the answer is yes. I mean, I don't know that we have a formal tracking mechanism for these, but there are always, things that come up in the process that we'll look at for consideration for the next year's budget. Always more priorities than possible to fund. But certainly when we're looking at, different projects that have been pilots, and how do we continue them, it's usually, the grant manager or the division director, like in Fred's case, who would bring that to leadership to say, this has been a really important program. It's had these outcomes. It's made this impact. It has, this return on investment. And can we consider funding it going forward? We're in it's particularly interesting time right now with having had a lot of federal funding from the post-pandemic and with a lot of that going away in this year or going forward. There's different decisions that have to be made about what can be sustained and what can't.
Thank you.
Representative Steady.
Is this something you're proposing for 27, seeing we've already presented a budget?
It's the 26 budget that would be, so this is not in the department's budget. It's
Okay.
not under consideration for FY 26.
Okay, that's what I was wondering, because we
Yeah,
already did a budget.
yeah, no, it's not in consideration. So, but what we have is a bill on the wall that asks us to consider this for the future. And Fred, you said, I want to make sure that I understood you. What I understood was that all the other states have some program like this for people who are deafblind. And does that mean that, is that what I heard, or is that accurate?
It is accurate. I'm not confident I can say all states, but I can say most states have. I know that in New England, for example, all states have SSP programs.
Well, right now.
Right.
And I want to make sure I'm understanding that it seems like the department has patched together funding through December of this year. Is that correct? Through December 2025?
That's correct, but I'll just clarify. So the original contract went through September 30th, and that had $50,000 for the statewide independent living council, $80,000 from FMAP. And then we found out that we're able to extend the FMAP through the end of December with an extra $35,000, which was great news. So I'll work on an amendment that extends it through from 10/1/25 through December 25, and I'll add that extra $35,000. That's correct.
Okay. And so it sounds like is this being funded through Medicaid investment, global commitment investments, or is this a fee for service?
The SILK funding is independent living Part B from ACL, and the FMAP money, maybe Angela can clarify that. I'm not super clear on that.
Yeah, that's the FMAP money Fred is referencing is the ARPA one-time federal FMAP funding.
Okay.
Not global commitment investment.
Okay. Okay. So that was essentially due to it. Okay. I understand what it is. All right. I guess one of the things that I'll put out there for Fred and Angela is recognizing it's a small number of people, but recognizing the extreme importance it is for that small number of people, and it's a relatively small amount. I would encourage you to, when you were talking, Angela, about setting priorities, I would encourage you to talk with people within Dale and AHS to think about this actually for budget adjustment for FY 26. Because it's more difficult to start something back up once it has ended. And if we were to consider this for FY 27, if there is a way that there can be some extension of that service in BAA for FY 26, that would be something for at least us to consider here. And so I'm just encouraging you to put that on the table internally as something that's of importance. And so I appreciate the fact that, folks have sort of cobbled together, enough funding to get through the end of the calendar year. And, we're hearing from people that this is something that they really rely on. I shouldn't say we, I'm hearing from people this, I have a very active constituent in this area. But I'm sure that we will hear from other people. Folks have, go ahead, Representative Benny.
Have you, spoke with the Vermont Association for the Blind and Visually Impaired to see if they would work with you? Or any other, because they're Vermont.
Yeah, this is Fred. We work super closely with the Association for the Blind. And at this point, actually the Division for the Blind, the state division, we fund some of their programs, like the Older Blind program comes through DBVI to the Association for the Blind. And anyway, I'm aware they don't have other funding for something like this.
Dale provides the funding for DBVI.
Right.
Yeah, they.
About the University Vermont Health Network.
I know, I was actually thinking, thinking about the knowing that the increased costs, healthcare costs of social isolation and inability to communicate with medical providers and things like that is very real. I'm just wondering about whether or not there's been any consideration, like in the Blueprint for Health, or whether, even through UVM, and, they have some requirements to invest in community-based services. Has there been any discussion there?
This is Fred. I don't have any of those contacts, but I would be glad to follow up if Angela can help me, make some of those contacts.
Yeah, I think it's, this is something that I think that UVM, might actually be interested in if you can connect with them. I'm just trying to, anyways, I think Angela can probably research the people to be in contact with there. And, the Blueprint is something that's in-house within AHS. That's something you can connect with. Just trying to figure out, ways to sustain this really low-cost service that is very preventative in nature. So appreciate the fact that y'all took a look at this during the pandemic and figured out that this would be a valuable thing, for the people who are deafblind in Vermont. And I think one of the things that, why we're even sort of taking a look at this is that just because the number of people is relatively small doesn't mean that their needs are any less than, the tens of thousands of Vermonters who are older and needing supportive services, or, people with other disabilities. And so I think that, it's important for us to be listening to all members of our Vermont community who have, differing needs. And I know that this doesn't fulfill everything for people, but it does serve as a real connection to community and healthcare and mental health and all of those things. So I'm just touching base to see if there's any other questions from community, from committee members. Go ahead, Representative Bishop.
Thank you for all this information. This is an area that's new for me. it's great that you're able to cobble together the funding resources through the end of the year. If for the moment, if we assume that there's no additional funding through the Budget Adjustment Act or in the FY27 budget going forward, what options might individuals, these 25 or so each month who are taking advantage of this service or utilizing this service, what options might they have available to continue to utilize the workforce that was either trained or identified by Vancor, because it's a fairly unique workforce that can support these individuals. So is there other opportunities, other funding that they could utilize that they would be eligible for? Any ideas on that front?
Yeah, this is Fred. I think you bring up a really good point, because these SSPs are trained, and if they're not used, then we'll lose them. So that is it's important not to have a gap. Two other things I'm thinking about is, one, I would consider going back to the statewide independent living council and say, yes, the last time was one time, but we really mean it this time. We need one more time. We need one more time. And, that would be their decision. The Division for the Blind does have an independent living caseload, and I'm sure we could find some of these people eligible and open them. The problem is it would be for a short time. They would set a goal, and when they met their goal, we would close their case, which is the whole purpose of the independent living program. So it wouldn't be a long-term solution, because Vancro couldn't build we would probably at most open 5 people. So it's not a solution long-term, but I am thinking a lot about that gap, that 6-month gap from January through June. That if we can get through that, and that's where my focus is right now.
I'm also thinking about things like, I guess this sort of turned into a brainstorming, but maybe talking with Vancro about potentially applying to the Vermont Community Foundation for philanthropy dollars, especially since if we are figuring out a way to support this, if there is some sense that the department would be looking at this on a longer term basis. So, they may have some interest in doing that on a short-term basis, probably not on an ongoing basis, but, maybe on a, 6-month basis to fill in that gap. So, I just encourage you to look at, I know that you're trying to do that, but it's lots of, I think, opportunities here, because it's very defined population, very defined set of services. And as you were just pointing out, a specifically trained workforce that would be important not to lose that connection with those folks. So any other questions? Yes, go ahead, Representative.
Another suggestion for the senior population, don't forget to try AgeWell too, because it's an inclusive for deaf, blind, for the elderly population. AgeWell.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both for being here this afternoon. We appreciate it. And, look forward to you, feel free to listen in, when we have other folks here later this week.
Great. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Nice to see you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Alrighty. Bye-bye. Okay, folks, so change in agenda. We're not leaving at 3 today. We're having an amendment from Representative Holcomb on H248. It is posted on our committee's website, and she should be here momentarily to review her thinking behind the website. And then she appears.
It's still like a little bit at a time.
Welcome, Representative Holcomb. Yeah, no, have a seat. Have a seat.
You got that right.
It's on our webpage, you said.
It is on our webpage, yeah. So, just committee, just so you have a sense of where we're going with this amendment. So we're going to hear Representative Holcomb's thoughts about why she thinks this amendment is important. And, we're going to have Ledge Council, two Ledge Councils that they've paired up on this. So we're going to have Katie McClin and Beth St. James. Thank you. Here, we're going to hear from DCF, and we're going to hear from Joint Fiscal Office. So that's we want to give sort of due consideration to this amendment because it's a pretty significant amendment, and we want to make sure that we have full testimony so people can make an informed decision about it. So, Representative Holcomb, welcome. You know all of us. The floor is yours. As I said, the amendment is on our webpage for folks, we'd love to hear from you about your thought process about the importance of the amendment and sort of that background.
First of all, and thank you for both the Legislative Council who aren't here right now. And I think it speaks to the fact that the partnership between education and human services has to always be there. And I want to start by acknowledging, in particular, the chair's longstanding commitment to ensuring that every 3 to 5 year old has access to a high quality early child learning environment that helps them build the self-regulation and social skills they need in a safe and supportive environment. Because without that, our youngest Vermonters cannot arrive at school ready to thrive, and they can't reach their full promise. So this is years leading to this moment. And as a person who has spent most of her career in the K through 12 sector, I'm mindful of how important the work that this committee has done and that the chair has done around making sure children start right, so that when they get to school, these children really need that support early on. And people will tell you it's play. It's not. It's done by educators who've been very intentional about the kind of experiences that they're creating, because that's what those children need to develop the kinds of skills that we take for granted if we don't see the work that goes into creating. So I want to acknowledge that work. And I'm also recommending this amendment today. It would not have been possible years ago because this body had not yet made the sustained efforts it's made both to improve quality and investment, both in early care and learning, but also in the educators for those early childhood environment. And I think that there's been a lot of work to both improve the professional development and to make sure that we are putting the best person we can with those young people so that they are getting the experiences and the comparable experiences. And I think one effect of that equalizing of funding and that better attention to quality of teaching in those early childhood environments is that I don't know that there is a difference between school-based pre-kindergarten and much of the care that you get in these private providers, even if it's not called pre-kindergarten. I mean, I think there's been such a concerted effort to improve quality of care, and that has to be our goal consistently. So if this was a couple of years ago, we wouldn't even be having this conversation because so much work has been done, and I want to acknowledge that. That said, we all ran a really tough race last year, in part because we all heard from people how concerned they are about property taxes, and property taxes are regressive. Currently, school districts spend about $14.3 million on pre-kindergarten that is offered in private providers. And we know that the Act 676 child care and payroll tax had about a $15 million surplus. There's also been some reversions at DCF related to early care and learning. What this amendment is proposing is that we make responsibility for the pre-K environments that are in public settings the responsibility ed fund, but that we make responsibility for payment only of pre-kindergarten in the private settings, the responsibility of those child care subsidies. This is not changing any of the regulatory environment. It's not changing the expectation that these be high quality environments, no matter where a child is. So we're not changing the experience of the environment. We're just simply changing the funding source in a way that makes a contribution to bringing down property taxes. So the other thing it has the potential to do is to reduce the paperwork burden for parents and school districts. And we've all heard about the challenge of that. We have private providers that have to work with 14 different school districts. We have school districts that work with, lots and lots of providers. We have parents who want to get both the state pre-K benefit, but also are getting CFAP subsidies already, who have to file twice to get the same program. So the other piece of this is to encourage DCF to look at a way to streamline that application process so we can bring down the paperwork burden for those folks. And as you know, this bill has not passed the Senate, so this is just going over to the Senate anyway. And so this will be taken up and presumably addressed by the Senate. Since it missed a crossover, we're not talking about this current year, we're talking about a year out. Yeah. So there's no time. There's time to think about this. So why now? Cost of living. Property taxes are part of cost of living here. It's become part of the cost of housing, and Vermont is too expensive for a lot of people. It's part of why we're seeing more and more people dependent on the kinds of subsidies and benefits that this committee looks at. And again, the property tax is a regressive tax that's making housing more unaffordable for lots of people. Last year, we saw an average 14.5 cent increase in the average property tax rate. We took some looks at what it is that's driving costs. Some of them are things like healthcare, which are pretty intractable. It's going to be really hard to get ahead of that right now, and certainly hard to get ahead of it quickly. But we know that that was about 100 million in the increase in the expenses in the ed fund. But it was enough to make us literally talk about turning the entire public education system upside down. We're proposing massive consolidation because of our property taxes. So this is a problem that people are obviously really worried about. We also have passed out of the House a yield bill that uses about 120 million in one-time money to buy down tax rates this year, which is setting us up for one heck of a spike in taxes next year. And we haven't yet done anything in this body that really begins to do the hard work of figuring out how do we continue to provide for the children who need that support and do it in a coherent way that's as seamless as possible for those families, but does it in a way that hopefully blunts some of those expected increases. We also expect Blue Cross Blue Shield to request a 20% increase in rates, and average marketplace premiums in Vermont are now 4 times those in New Hampshire. I'm saying that to remind you all that we are going to see continued increases in property taxes unless we can figure out how to get ahead of that. That means higher costs for schools, which means higher property taxes. Again, we're going to have to be looking for ways that protect the care our youngest learners need, but also does it in a way that hopefully is blunting some of that impact on our property tax. Again, the Ed Fund last year, I received data from the Agency of Education that says the Ed Fund spent about 14.3 million on pre-kindergarten in private settings, private providers. This bill still makes school districts responsible for kids who are tuitioned into public providers. So if you're tuitioning your kid to a different public school, that is still your local school district's responsibility, but it's keeping it within the fund. And so that's the primary difference. In terms of what else this bill does, I mean, I think if you support this amendment, you are voting to lower the average property tax by about 1 cent. And every cent does count right now. We're going to have to claw back those savings one thing at a time. This also allows rural schools in areas that are underserved currently we were talking with the chair about the continuing challenge of ensuring access in rural communities. It's really hard, but they need to maintain scale. They may have lost 60, 70% of the kids in their elementary school. They may have space, obviously would need some modifications to the building, but every kid matters when you're trying to achieve scale. And this would allow those schools to continue to operate those programs if they wish. But it would still allow parents who chose to place their child in a private provider a pretty seamless experience. They could continue from the CFAP childcare into the pre-K childcare in that setting in a pretty seamless way. And hopefully any revisions to the application process could make that even less burdensome. And there are issues now around that. If a child moves districts, even if they stay in the same provider, they have to disrupt their application. Whereas if it was all done through the state, then if they moved, from South Burlington to Burlington, they wouldn't have to reapply for their pre-kindergarten, but through a different school district because it would be done through the state. So there's some opportunities to make that experience more seamless. And then additionally, in the state, in the K-12 system, we give districts the option of deciding whether or not to pay tuition vouchers or whether or not to operate their own programs. This would return schools to that option. And some schools have really felt very, very strongly about that in the past because they want to make sure that when they're placing, particularly one of the reasons that school districts are so invested in early care and learning is they're responsible for the, the early childhood services for students with disabilities, and they want to make sure their kids are in inclusive settings. And there are childcares that don't serve children with challenging behaviors, or maybe don't feel like they're ready, despite some of the supports this committee has provided to provide support for students with disabilities. And so this would allow districts to really think about how to maintain their services and support in environments that really serve all of their kids. So that's the overview. I'd be happy to address more. Again, this is a bill that you would be passing this year. You missed crossover, so it's not going into effect. It still has to go through the Senate. But it's an effort that hopes we will all think about how we can do our bit to both protect these youngest learners and build on the powerful work that this committee has done, but also be mindful of the fact that we need to be looking at ways to bring down property taxes. I'm happy to answer any questions, and I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Representative Holcomb. Appreciate that. I'm wondering, it doesn't seem like, in looking through your amendment, it doesn't seem like that, it looks like it sort of maintains the status quo with the exception of essentially, having the, private pre-K paid out of CCFAP money and, the public pre-K continue in the schools, which, is something that, people have tossed around in the building for a little bit now. The question that sort of arose for me, really going back a few years now, is really the disparity between what we pay in the public school system for the same service that we receive in the private system. We pay much less for that right now. I don't remember the exact number, but it's about $3,600, $3,700 a student that goes in tuition payments essentially to private pre-K. And I might not be remembering this exactly, but I think about 2/3 of the students attend pre-K in the private sector. I think probably essentially because of the no need to transfer the child from a public program to a child care at the end of the 10 hours, if that's all that.
And also, if you've started, if your child's been there for 0 to
Right.
3, you may choose to continue
Exactly.
rather than shift
There might be a
environment. And there are all
second
kinds
child.
of reasons. There are all kinds of reasons, yeah.
Yeah.
And one drop off is huge, as a
Yeah.
parent. And I'm just gonna say, as you all know, if you have more than one kid, yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so I'm just, I feel like it's sort of like maybe a step, but not a complete step, in thinking about, one of the things that we did when we passed Act 76 is to try, and I know part of this, is to try to bring some equity to access for children across the state. And we haven't achieved that yet, frankly. What this sort of makes, in some respects, a major step, in some respects, a minor step in terms of trying to simplify access for families. The major part being, I'm not sure on an ongoing basis, whether the receipts that we have coming in from the child care contribution will support this, to be honest, without an increase in that base payroll tax, which would be, I don't know, out of one pocket and into the other, if we look at it that way. So that's one issue. And then the issue of equity in terms of expectations and, for committee members, we're going to be discussing a bill here shortly that's coming over from the Senate around establishing education and licensure requirements for early educators in childcare settings. That is coming over from the Senate. So it's kind of all wrapped up into a very, I guess what I would say, multifaceted discussion about how we handle pre-K. And in the House passed report or bill, there is a section on pre-K. I know the Senate is making all sorts of
There's a lot going on there.
A lot going on.
I'll just say that.
Who knows? A final version
And who
may
knows,
or may not.
there'll be a
there
final
will be a
version. Yeah, there may not be a final version. Yeah.
So I guess I'm saying on one hand, I appreciate the thought process about going into this and sort of taking a step. And on the flip side, I know there's a lot of other elements that impact this as well. So,
Yes, may I speak to that?
yeah, and then, there's, some questions. Yeah.
So I think several things. I mean, I would encourage us all to consider also declining enrollment, because the same enrollment declines that are hitting K-12 are very pronounced too in this setting. And so that's something we're going to have to, we may spend more, but we may have fewer kids. And so that's something we're going to need to address. On the comment about equality of pay, I will tell you, I will not mention who did it, but because it was several people, but the initial rationale internally when Act 166 went through was that we needed the private providers because they were cheaper. Personally, I don't agree with that, because I think if you want quality people and stable providers in care, you need to pay people well, you need to pay them fairly. And we did not do that under Act 160, but prior to Act 166. And I think it's partly why the sector is struggling. And I think, this committee has worked hard to professionalize that sector. It has worked hard to increase compensation in that sector. And I expect it to continue that work. I think you will find, as we have found in education, that wages often correspond to scale. If you work in a large district in Vermont, by the time you're 5 years into the profession, you're paid about $5,000 to $10,000 more than if you were in a small district. And that is something, the scale challenge of K-12 is on spades in childcare. And I think that's a hard conversation that we're going to have to get around. If you've only got 3 kids, you're not going to get a living wage. You can't. It's just not big enough. And we're already seeing that in the tension between center-based cares and family-based cares. At the same time, we need that flexibility, because in my area, there are people who work second shifts and they need a place that can help care for their kids. So this is going to take tremendous intentionality. That is why I'm not trying to change the regulatory structure. That's why you have this committee. And I know that you're going to take the time to think deliberately and intentionally to make sure that we have a system that meets the needs of families first and foremost, because that's who this system is for. And then thinks about, okay, how do we provide that? So those are real issues. They aren't equal now, the two settings. You can't get pre-kindergarten in a public school without being taught by a public school educator who's a certified teacher. That is not true in the private sector, not consistently, even though some do a fabulous job and do have licensed early, elementary school teachers who are, early care teachers. But I think the goal, again, is to continue to make sure that we're working towards good educators who are well supported and fairly compensated, get benefits, and can afford to do the good work that our children need. I don't see that stopping with this. Mm-hmm. And I look forward to hearing what you do on some of the bills. This is just an effort to acknowledge the work that has been done in that sector. And also to say, as we move forward, this is a significant enough commitment that we need to make it, but it doesn't always need to come out of the ed fund. The parity in cost is increasing. I mean, that you've done significant work around raising the reimbursement rates.
And I don't want to give the impression that there aren't licensed teachers teaching pre-K in the private sector, because there are. Yeah.
No, absolutely. But there are also a lot of licensed early childhood teachers who are teaching 3rd grade. And part of it is because if you frankly have a teacher salary and competitive benefits, why would you work for no benefits at a much lower salary? People are people. They got to raise their kids and pay for their groceries too. That's a market problem.
Yeah.
And unlike K-12, pre-K is still a market, and markets have pretty predictable responses to supply and demand and affordability. And I think that's partly what you're seeing and trying to address. It's why in other countries that try to move to universal systems, they actually move away from subsidies and vouchers towards a market managed model, where the municipalities are often managing to make sure that there's capacity, but also that it's done in a robust enough way that they can pay people fairly. And that's hard work. You're coming from what was, we never start from scratch, right?
Right.
And if you could, we would never design this system. Unfortunately, we have amazing people working super hard to take care of our youngest learners. And we have to figure out how to work with what's in place to try to move to a place that's better. And that's, you're not going to do that overnight.
It's not,
It's not going to
exactly.
happen overnight.
We have Representative Steady and then Representative Bishop.
I got a few things. I'm the Westford representative, and at the beginning, they reached out to me when they were being told that their preschool students were going to be sent to Essex. You might want to help me. I'm not good at speaking. And they were very concerned. Right now, they're staying in Westford.
Mhm.
Can you imagine how concerning that was to parents to hear you're going to take our preschool students and bus them all the way to Essex? So that didn't happen, but it could happen in the future because it's a small school and it's my job to watch out for them. So I'm going to put that on the radar. Milton does not have the space. So Milton does a lottery. So not all kids get in it. I have a friend that has had a pre-cart kindergarten. She couldn't access it because her daycare didn't offer the preschool services. So her child didn't get preschool. And how do you do it in a school like Milton that doesn't have the space? You're going to put them outside.
And this is a conversation that we
Yeah.
had with your chair. This is a real
Yeah.
issue.
That's a big issue. And not just Milton, but Milton has a lottery. So it's like you should hear it around Milton when it comes time.
I know people.
All the kids that don't get it and how upsetting that is. My nephews both got it. They were lucky.
So
Oh, I got a
but this
lot
is
here.
just to be clear, when you go to kindergarten, the school will enroll your child.
No,
And
this
if-
is-
No, I know,
Oh.
I'm saying, and they will expand it because we have a constitutional obligation to provide K-12 education right now. Pre-K is not a public good, it's a public benefit. We passed universal subsidies. We did not pass universal pre-kindergarten, which means that the school district doesn't have to provide that. That's separate. That's a separate issue from this. And you're right. In some districts, it makes sense to put it in your building. In some districts, they don't have anything near the capacity to put in their building. And they have very strong and healthy relationships with local providers. That's a different issue, but I think it speaks to an issue that I know has concerned your chair for years, and particularly in some of our more rural communities. You know, it could be a school program that closes, but it could also be a private provider that closes. And when they do, there is no childcare or there is no pre-K. And that's a real issue too. We have an unstable system right now. And when those programs close, whether they're public or private, it leaves parents high and dry. And that's a real issue.
Right. And I think it's important to point out that in Act 76, we actually are endeavoring to actually make this a public education program and have, because right now, honestly, nobody's responsible for assuring that pre-K exists. So while you can have access to 10 hours a week, theoretically, if you don't have it
You don't
in
have
your
no space.
community, whether you don't have any space or your school district has said, well, no, it's not required, so we're not going to do it, or there's no private, it's not really equitable for families, you know. So some families in Winooski, for instance, we heard testimony when we were doing Act 76 that they have full day, full time, 5 days a week, pre-K. They understand the importance of early intervention for kids, and not that other school districts don't, but they've made that decision. Some other parts of the state are doing the same thing. And yet we heard from some places in the Northeast Kingdom where they don't have access to pre-K at all, whether it's in the public school or private. And so in Act 76, this is one of the things, I'm just going to be on a bandwagon just for a moment, soapbox. We had a pre-K implementation committee that I'm just going to say outright on the record that they didn't really do their work. There were specific things that we had asked them to do, and they essentially just, not saying they didn't meet a lot, and that, it was through it was a tumultuous time, let's just put it that way. And they did not get accomplished what we had hoped that they would accomplish. And that was making recommendations about how we assure access to pre-K. We were starting with 4-year-olds, but, and that we don't have that right now.
And to be clear,
Yeah.
1984, I got the kindergarten in there. I was on the committee to get full-time kindergarten.
Yeah.
Just to be honest. So I've been involved in this. 1984, I was pregnant for my first child. So this is something that I've been involved in for many years, but many schools don't even have the space, and it wouldn't be equitable because there's no way they could give them the space.
But they have different
And the
solutions. Yeah.
Winooski did millions and millions and millions of dollars. I was there, took their minutes
Mhm.
for their school board. I got a lot of jobs. And when they were coming up with the building, so they have a huge facility now that they paid millions for. They have space.
Yeah, it's space is an issue, staffing is an issue.
And it's gonna vary by district. I mean,
It is.
I used to be a principal 700 years ago, and we actually tried to place all our ECE, our early childhood students into. We tried to place all our students into the same private provider. We didn't have space initially. We ended up building, so we ended up with more space, but we placed students in a private provider. We placed them all in the same private provider because then we could provide the disability services, for example, on site without having our special educators spend half their time driving around. Because that's a scarce resource. So there are ways that it can be done. And some districts used to contract for those services. My district does provide full day care, and our wait list is 2 times the amount of kids we can serve. I mean, it's a real issue.
Mhm.
And I know that you're going to keep working on that. And my guess is we will always have private providers providing care for our children. We will always have public schools providing care for our children. This committee will consider what recommendations come back on pre-kindergarten. But, if we can increase the quality, the goal has to be every 3 to 5 year old, wherever they are, is getting the best care we can provide. And they're arriving at school strong, healthy, confident, and ready to learn. That has to be the goal of this program.
Representative Bishop.
Thank you for the conversation. I had only a brief amount of time to start to take a look through the amendment. So I didn't make it all the way through. So I'm going to try to determine which of my questions are relevant, which may not be. But I'll start with a question first. I agree with
All relevant, it's just a matter of who.
It's confusing. It's a strike all, but the yellow stuff is the stuff that's new, and it entirely deals with who pays.
And that's
Yeah.
one of the things I'm trying to get at. But one question when we talk about, and I agree with the goal of ensuring that students are arriving at kindergarten prepared. But if my recollection is correct from Building Bright Futures testimony earlier this session, I thought Vermont actually is doing well in that regard with respect to kindergarten readiness. Either what the goal we set for ourselves or compared nationally. So it seems like with this mixed delivery system, we're currently meeting goals for kindergarten readiness.
So what I said at the very beginning is we couldn't have had this conversation 5 or 6 years ago.
Yeah.
Because there has been so much heavy attention to ensuring that. We can actually say it can be provided by, if it's in a private provider, by DCF. If it's in a public school, it's funded by the Ed Fund. We can separate the funding now, but you already have that regulatory set of expectations. We've increased the size of the subsidies, and we've worked on provider qualifications and making sure our early educators are better compensated. Those changes have allowed us to think about segmenting. If you'd done this 5 or 6 years ago, there wasn't that parity between the settings.
And that's where I'm still trying to figure out, make sure I have a clear understanding of the goals of the amendment. Because it sounds like there was discussion of both where and how it's funded. And then, but there also seems to be, I thought, an underlying theme of a preference for delivery through public schools.
No, this is just saying, I mean, we know currently how many parents have chosen to enroll in private providers for all kinds of reasons, and how many have chosen to enroll in public schools. So we know the total we're spending on both settings. And what I'm saying is we are in a property tax emergency. If this can change and bring down property taxes even by a bit, even as it doesn't really change the experience of families, why wouldn't we do that?
So,
Because what this will do is it will be an effort on our part to show that we're taking seriously the challenge around property taxes, and we're looking for ways to bring down those taxes without changing the opportunities that are available. The last piece around the language, that was a slight regulatory change, because having been on the side of applying for things, I know it's a lot of work, and parents are really busy when I've read those applications. So if we can streamline it so that parent doesn't have to apply twice for services that are continuous in the same setting, that sounds like a win. So that was the DCF language request.
So for a parent enrolling a child in an early child care center, private center, for their experience, things may look different on the back end as far as how it's paid, but they would still be eligible for their child for the Act 166 10-hour a week universal pre-K, and they would still be eligible for the same level of benefits for CCFAP. It's just the back end, how the state is coming up with the dollars to pay for that.
Right. And instead of having to apply both to their school district and to DCF,
Right.
they would only have to
Sure.
apply to DCF.
Which something I know. how
I love
complicated
single
that can
point of
be.
contact is awesome. That should be the goal of every public program, single
And-
point of contact.
And the center's current need to work with many different school districts is complicating things for the providers.
Yeah.
The private providers.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
And it's created some disruptions in service. I mean, from a parent's point of view, if they're in a private provider, and they haven't moved their kid, it doesn't occur to them that if they move their house, it might affect their funding, right? That doesn't make sense. And I know that there's been a lot of work around that, but it's, what we want is to make it as easy as possible for parents and as easy as possible for kids.
Yeah, as I continue to look at this, I just want to ensure that it preserves the different options for parents, because I'm a bit concerned about whether with the increasing move towards the use of public schools, not necessarily related to this amendment, but in general, that if we lose parts of the mixed delivery system, whether working parents will have the options that they need for the number of hours per day, year-round care, and things that I don't know that I'm seeing in all of the public school programs.
So this doesn't require any kid to go to a public school right now. It doesn't
No,
change any parent enrollment decision. And parents who choose to go to public schools can still choose to do it. Parents who prefer a private setting or a setting with flexible hours or extended day can certainly choose to do that. Some public school, and we have a full day pre-kindergarten program at our school, and they also have aftercare, a partnership. So with a private provider on site, so there's that option. That's all of those are still there. It's just that we're changing. It's as if we took the hoses behind and shifted them.
Yeah.
And if we do this right, parents shouldn't know this, or it should be easier because if they're in a private provider, they still only have to apply once. Public schools will still, if you're in a public program and you extend into an approved childcare after hours, you still have to apply twice.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for explaining this. And I'm curious about now that, if this were to pass, since we wouldn't be taking from the ed fund, we, in theory, be drawing more from CCFAP. If the dollars are there, like what kind of strain, or is there are we worried about the dollars in the CCFAP?
Well, I think we should be. We should always be. Right now, the CFAP subsidy surplus is a little bit more than the amount that we appear to be spending on private programs for this particular benefit right now. But you are also doing a study through JFO that by the time this bill is being considered in the Senate will be done. So the Senate will have that information to make a more robust analysis when they take this bill up.
About what kind of monies are left over?
Yeah, they're looking at the issue is from what I understand, it's it's unclear how many it's unclear how many people apply for the subsidies are also applying for full day care. And it's just, there's some little bit of teasing out they want to do. I don't think it will be more because the maximum we were spending is about 14.3 according to the Agency of Education. So you're in the ballpark. And then I think the question is, with cohorts shrinking and with whatever, I think, that's an empirical question that JFO is going to answer for you. So by the time this comes up again in the Senate, you'll have that information.
CCFAP cohort actually isn't shrinking, that's increasing.
That's what it should be increasing. We certainly hope. Yeah, but the pre-K.
Yeah. I mean, but it would all be out of the same kind of money.
Yeah.
The other thing, for people to keep in mind is that quote unquote surplus is utilized. The governor's utilized it one way, the House utilized it one way, and the Senate has utilized it yet a different way. So in the FY26 budget, recognizing that this wouldn't be until FY27. But some of those things are ongoing in nature, not only one time.
And you may decide next year that this doesn't make sense. What I will point out is that we have now run up the fiscal year 27 school budgets by about 120 million. And we have not yet done anything that shows that we're trying to bring down that cost. And so part of what I think we have an obligation to do is our due diligence. Just say, does this make sense? And you will have that robust analysis done for the Senate to consider before it passes this bill next year, and we'll figure it out.
Questions? No? Okay. Wasn't sure if that was a. Okay. All righty. Thank you so much, Representative.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Yeah. And thank you for all your work for these kids. As someone who has taught and been principal in an elementary school, the quality of early childhood makes a real difference. So thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah. And I'll try not to fall on my way out of this.
Yeah, back on the question.
Yeah, we don't need you back on,
I was thinking what she
Take care.
I was thinking that.
Okay, Lori, can you just do a check-in on tomorrow's agenda? We've been trying, because, this is a bit of a complicated amendment, and so it has, lots of different implications. At first blush, it might sound simple, but it's not really simple. So we want to make sure that we're doing our due diligence in talking to people who can help inform us. So what do we have for changes for tomorrow?
We have the other amendment, the House approves amendment at 9:45.
Okay,
And then at 11, we have the two attorneys.
I'm sorry, at 11?
At 11.
Okay.
For the Holcomb Amendment. And the JFO person is invited, haven't heard yet.
For that same time?
Yes. And
Okay.
then and if she can't come there, we can take her after floor with Janet McLaughlin, who was confirmed.
Okay,
Oh, wow.
Janet's confirmed after floor. Okay,
So
Between the 10 and 10:30, non-amendment
unless I
related.
have to move them, yep.
Lori?
Yeah.
That was considerable wizardry.
Yes, that's
On your
why we call it so last minute.
I know.
Like, it's incredible.
Okay, so, yeah, no, seriously,
I think she likes the challenges.
trying to get all those folks, particularly at this time of the year when there's lots of different things happening and lots of different committees and, okay. So we should be able to, vote on that amendment, tomorrow after.
Oh, I was just asking our superintendent if she could do testimony.
Well,
Sure. Send it.
well, it's an amendment.
I know, but.
I think that maybe, yeah, I mean, I think it would be,
Yeah,
probably,
it's our town.
yeah, reach out to her,
Okay.
in
I was
terms.
just doing it before I asked you to see if she would do it for me.
Certainly send her a copy of the amendment and ask her if she has
I
any
did that.
feedback.
Okay.
Okay. So, we will be taking up a vote on that amendment after, tomorrow afternoon or Friday morning, one or the other.
It's on notes.
Okay. Yeah, well, we're, Esme, you'll have to, extend that.
Okay.
And, right now, I would say for, let me look at the calendar. Right now, I would say, so, until May 7th.
May 7th, okay.
It has to go to 3 other committees
Yeah.
after it leaves here. So that's why we need to do our part and move that along. So this will go to House Education Committee, then it will go to Ways and Means, and then it will go to Appropriations. And then it will come to the floor. And after each one of those, if there's any particular, depending upon what our outcome is, it could, at any point, it could be back here, right?
Right.
So
Yep.
just, it's gonna have a process. So, if you could let the speaker's office know that that's what you're going to do tomorrow, that would be great. So then we have a Representative Maricki is going to report the House Appropriations Amendment, so we'll hear from him, as Lori said, tomorrow morning. We should be able to vote on that one actually relatively quickly. And then the other thing is we have, I don't remember if I said post it, but go ahead, H46.
I don't know if you said post it, but I mean, I've got after floor time on Friday open.
Okay, vote on that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll vote on H46, probably on Friday. Tomorrow looks like turns out to be a busy day. So H46, they'll be posted. Today we got the changes that y'all made when I was not here.
And can I send that to the health department? for them to review?
Yeah, sure.
Oh, okay.
Sure. Okay, so. And then I think what we will also do on Friday after floor is we will hear reports from y'all about your reports.
I'm ready.
Okay. All righty, sounds good. All right, now Lori, I think